shall we kick off? The final substantive chapter run through of our UK Law Commission Digital Assets consultation paper group. Iris Rad is leading this effort and has prepared some chapter summaries for the remaining chapters and the consultation question prompts. So, Iris, I'll hand over to you to lead us.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Joni. Hopefully you can both see that.
Yes.
The first slide. Okay, perfect. So this session we'll try and cover off, I think there are 4 chapters left, 16, 17, 18, 19. They're all substantive chapters. Ideally, we can get through 16 and 17 today, which both deal with custody of crypto asset tokens. And then we'll see how much we can get through, and that leaves 1 or 2 chapters next week. So that will be the final session. So just starting off on crypto asset custody, this is something that I fortunately know a little bit about, probably more so than the other chapters, because we've gone through the custody agreement with our external custodian. So understanding the regulatory guide 133 requirements and things like that. This one's a lot more theoretical. So I start off with a definition of custodian and the duties of a custodian, which was a statement by Justice Glendall in Roscoe and Cryptopia, which I think was a New Zealand case. It says the duties of a custodian of a property belonging to another include securing, safeguarding and maintaining the property in the condition received and accounting for any changes in it. Holding refers to a custodian having the capacity to exercise or to coordinate or direct the exercise of actual control. The degree of control can be understood as comprising 2 dimensions. That's what's discussed in the paper. So firstly, you have positive control, so the factual ability to use, dispose or transfer of an asset, as well as negative control, the ability to exclude others from using the asset. I think we've discussed both of these before in the context of control and possession. In order to fall under custody of crypto asset tokens, you'll have to have both positive and negative control. Yeah, is there a question, Arturo?
Yeah, not sure what the best format for this is, considering that it's recorded. But I do have a point to make here, and it's acknowledging the distinction in terms of custody that is not only custody of a wallet, but it's also custody. If we define custody as control over private keys, it's custody in terms of the wallet, but also custody in terms of the smart contracts. Because even if I don't have control over the private keys of a wallet, but my contract enables me to move assets around because I have the contract's private keys, then yeah, that distinction falls in both of these. And the second one is actually not discussed at all anywhere, but it's technologically possible.
It is a fascinating distinction, and yeah, you're right. It doesn't get to that level of articulate framing, because in the one hand, I could have my tether tokens with a custodian, but if I'm actually one of the internal employees of Tether, you know, maybe I actually have access controls to manipulate, you know, what the custodian thinks they hold on my behalf. So that's a fascinating use case. Yeah, actually,
it'll become even more prevalent now with the implementation of the the project name layer C, where effectively the exercise is designing tokens where the owner of the private keys for the token has the technical ability to move ownership around without signatures by the initial wallets.
And anybody who's watching this recording, the backdrop is, you know, are we moving to tokenized economies of, you know, tokenizing existing financial instruments? And if so, you know, how do we have, you know, the native tokens comply, or will they have to comply? And we've already got Switzerland, Luxembourg, France that have recognized DLT securities. They deploy them from, you know, an approved smart contract format. And layer C is sort of a different approach again, a really cool approach, which maybe if we have time after we finish all of the chapters, we can go through it. but it's an attempt at achieving regulatory compliance with technology solutions. It's well done to Arturo and the team.
Thank you.
Sorry,
You're
Iris,
welcome,
back to
Nathan.
you. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Thank you. So Nathan, I'm not sure what part you came in, but we're just making the distinction between, sorry, Arturo, would you mind repeating the point?
Yes,
Between
that
the crypto
in
tokens and the wallet custody of, is that correct?
yeah. So in this case, we're discussing the role of a custodian as an entity that has control of transferring value held in a wallet. I guess that it's more generally about control of transferring wallet value within the blockchain. Typically, we think of this as control over the wallet, but in fact, it's both control over the wallet, i.e. the private keys of the wallet, but also the private keys of the smart contract that represents the token that is in question. So it's both things that need to be accounted for, which
Awesome.
usually is not accounted for.
Yep. No, I definitely agree with that. Thank you for the summary.
Yeah, I definitely also agree that it's an important distinction to make, and the paper doesn't go into it in enough detail. But what it does do is talk about 3 different types of custodian relationships that are recognized. And the third one, I note that you talked about multi-signature wallets that would fall under hybrid service providers. So the first one would be a direct custodian. So we have factual control, both positive and negative. Then you would have custodial and other technology service providers, which have positive, but don't have positive, but would have negative control. And also hybrid providers, which sometimes have negative control. So the hybrid service providers are defined as involving shared custody through the operation of the multi-signature accounts and the distribution of the private keys between the owner and the nominees of the owner and the service provider. So this would share shared custody arrangement. And that goes into the first question. So the paper concludes that it's appropriate to draw a distinction between direct custody services, so that is holding crypto tokens, and to extend that, holding the wallets on behalf of or for the account of other persons, and having the capacity to exercise or coordinate or direct the exercise of factual control, both positive and negative, and custodial or other technology-based services that don't involve the direct custody relationship. So the paper proposes that it's necessary to draw a distinction between direct custody services and indirect custody services.
I agree with that, but also from a cybersecurity perspective, I'm more likely to choose the hybrid. Well, depending on what the hybrid does, but on the assumption that the hybrid, fractionalizes or shards the key. Whereas direct, it's still sort of unknown whether it's one or a few people based, that are employed in one company that are managing that key management and taking from hot to cold storage, depending on how liquid you need the crypto to move when it's being taken out of custody, on a day-to-day basis. So it feels like it's more secure to do those hybrid type approaches, and anything that results in more clear communication to the everyday person. This distinction seems like it's trying to get us the way there, which would be good. But it's not written with a cybersecurity focus. It's more just trying to articulate the different terms of each of these schemes and arrangements, more so. Are there any, because in other standards, there's like IT resilience requirements. Is there any reference to that? Or is it still quite a high level in the way that the categories are described, Iris?
I think it's quite high level, yeah, from my reading of it. Yeah.
Well, just something we could propose, IT resilience requirements depending on each category.
Would you say that
and not just IT, the governance around that. Sorry, Arturo.
Oh no, it's fine. I just get lost easily in the text. It feels to me like the reason why someone would write this is more to be able to cover a wider range of edge cases in the, let's call it the identification of what custody effectively means, and kind of saying that it's not like it's the full custody, but it's also getting into the gray area that easily happens with tech, where you can have custody across multiple entities and different degrees of control across that gray scale. Does that make sense, or am I just?
No, it does. It makes sense. It is confusing. I mean, to the normal person, negative and positive control, like what on earth is that?
Yeah.
So first of all, we need better ways of explaining that. So maybe we can even try to think of those terms. I mean, to you, Arturo, like as the non-lawyer, this is why I'm targeting you. What makes sense to say, instead of a direct arrangement, you know, where they have positive and negative control, like what is the plain meaning of that to you? Is it just that they control everything, and therefore they could take your, like saying they could take your keys if an employee is not trusted, saying it in that way, what the risk is?
Okay, so the first time I heard the concept of positive and negative control, it confused the hell out of me. I think that it's a very valuable definition, which I'm kind of comfortable with right now. And because it's well defined, I think that it should be there. But on the other hand, it's a very binary definition. And if I were to try to generalize this, I would say that in these types of scenarios, you either have control or you don't have control. And when you do have control, you have different, let's call it, weights in the control, right? It's effectively like a governance process. Are you part of the governance process, and how heavy is the weight of your decision within this process in terms of deciding if value should be transferred or not? And do you have a veto, which I guess is the negative control, or do you only have the ability to originate, right, initiate the transaction? So if you're attempting to achieve generalization, then perhaps giving a more well-defined generalization would make more sense, because I think that the positive and negative control concept can easily become old in the various ways that you could actually apply governance. And I know Nathan has many thoughts about that, and you know, applied specifically to this.
Very welcome if you are.
No, I am. I'm just, I've been running around all day, so I'm currently eating my lunch, and I thought I might as well press my camera while I'm eating.
We'll come back to you. It's fine.
No. There's no worries. Yeah, it's an interesting way to think about it. I mean, I'm just now being exposed to negative and positive control. I just took a note on my pad of paper, like I wrote down, learn negative and positive control legal definition. So that's a task. But yeah, in terms of just around this question and governance in this question, I think it's really interesting to take a different, use a different lattice work, I guess, and say, all right, well, if it's a co-custodial solution, right? Actually no, even in that, like with the co-custodial solution, who has power, who has governing power? Because the actual at the end of the day, the actual exchange, we'll call it, the centralized authority, not the individual, not the retail or the institution, has any power. So is it really co-custodial? And then how would who would bear liability in that situation? Like if it's co-custodial and we're apparently sharing the keys, but in reality I have, me as the exchange has all the control, and then we lose it, I'm like, but wait, it's co-custodial, so like, do you bear the liability? Because it's not my problem. So I don't know, it's just like I have opinions about governance, and I'll definitely bring it up after when it becomes relevant. Otherwise we'll just launch into a 3-hour conversation again. But until then, it's just like, how would governance reconcile that, right? Like who has actual control? Well, we know that. We know who has control, but then why don't they have any liability?
If we don't put it in a statutory scheme, like so where these categories could fall is that, let's just say you have 3 categories. One's direct, one's hybrid, and then, I don't know, you have something in the middle. You then have the statutory requirements for those schemes, and the direct one is it's not up to the token custodian to define its own contractual terms and conditions. The statute will require them to segregate each customer's assets and have a third party involved in whatever the key management solution is. Like, so that gets into your IT resilience. But if the statute doesn't want to be so prescriptive, if it wants to stay principles-based, which the common law does seek to do, then we could get those sort of prescriptive requirements in the guides, like what Iris referred to, RG 133, which is what sets out the regulator's expectation and standards around implementation. But it's still open for the token custodian to define their terms and conditions as to, you know, if something does go wrong, they will say we can't be held liable, or only held liable up to this amount, which, you know, kind of replicates the federal deposit insurance scheme. So even if you've got $1 million in your bank account, only 250,000 or whatever it is will ever be covered under that insurance scheme.
Gotcha. All right, cool. Thank you for that. That's a great explanation.
Yeah, well, but the other thing that, just to pick up on both of what you said and Arturo, is like, what is control? And I think that you said initiation, and initiation control is something that I understand, because a transaction can only go through if I've initiated it. And that gives me a really strong sense of control. Whereas I'm a lesser person in the ranking of things if I only have approval authority with a lot of other people. Where that's the sort of degree of control perspective, if we came at it from there. And we teach people, we educate them on the languages of degree of control, because it isn't I control or I don't control.
So wait, sorry. So then in that situation, if we're defining control to be like who can initiate, or just like in that one framework, if, again, in a hybrid solution, if they're using a third-party provider, then it's controlled, the keys are controlled by the third party, I guess, and therefore it's sort of in the middle, and therefore we can classify it as hybrid or co-custodial. But in reality, all the power ultimately rests with the centralized authority, because it's their keys, it's a crypto that they're holding. So again, I'm sort of just playing devil's advocate here and picking apart like what doesn't make sense in my head. But how can those two coexist if we're saying and the ability to you know, have control in initiating, and simultaneously have a situation where maybe it's co-custodial in the sense that both parties can move it around, or the keys are actually owned by, like, Coinbase had their whole Web3 wallet co-custodial thing. It was complete bullshit. It was like they were sort of saying that you can do what you want, you can move it out, but ultimately the keys are just stored by Coinbase. It's completely just them holding it for you with no layers of protection for retail, because there's no benefit for it. However, if you're paying for a Coinbase Pro wallet, then you get all the protection, which is obviously just unfair and stupid, like double-edged standards for retail and institutions. But the initiative control was okay, sorry, I'm rambling now, but in a perfect sense, if we have a proper holder of the keys, a third party, but one other person has that control to move it around, how does initiative control and ownership of the keys work together?
Through in a couple of different examples. Just off the top of my head, I think that if I am scanning the market for the token custodians, I'd compare them on the fees that they're charging me, whether they have insurance cover and the level of the insurance cover, and their IT security processes. So I think part of IT security would be if they help me understand that I have initiation control and that one of the approvers is the other third party, and then another approver is, you know, the exact token custodian I think that I'm dealing with. That starts to give me a sense of education, and if something goes wrong, so if either the token custodian or that other third party involved doesn't perform their role on time, I need to trigger some sort of revocation. And this is where, like, the security threat comes back to me, because, you know, if I'm the subject of a wrench attack, there is security in the delay or the hold up of waiting for other people to approve a transaction. But if they're not performing their role, then it revokes back to me and I get full rights. But maybe you need to have delays inbuilt in that revocation, so that you know, you do have to wait 2 days or 14 days, so that you're not, like, individual persons are not the subject of harm if they're known to be involved in those arrangements. Sorry, again, me rambling, but just off the top of my head.
Would it be reasonable or make sense to perhaps look at the trustee model in terms of perhaps difference between origination and vetoing and you know, just general asset management? Right, if you're a trustee, you hold the assets. The rich kid asks the trustee, can you please do this for me? And you know, if that's within what they're supposed to be doing, they will execute it, right? But not otherwise. And they wouldn't go out and say.
It's just a new set of facts. Like, the way I see it is, you know, share brokers, share traders who who have a number of high net wealth clients and trade on their behalf. Are they the subject of cybersecurity concerns because you know, hackers want to get access to instruct the broker to sell the shares to get the profits? Like, because we are breaking down and disintermediating the layers, you know, it would be a broker, it would be a clearing facility, it would be the market operator. There's like 3 organizations that a hacker would have to get through, which does take more time. But in a token custodian context, it's still more real time and quick and less layers. So that's what I'm trying to understand. Like, how do we manage the different security threats in the overall change?
But isn't that more a conversation for cybersecurity specialists?
You would think so. You would think so. But I think that the nuances of this technology mean that we can't talk about property rights without cybersecurity anymore. Okay. It is my sort of working assumption.
There's a cool it's not a new primitive, but it's being developed and applied now. It's called actually, you'll know this one. It's like verifiable delay functions, VDFs, and it's a way to actually, because the whole idea of randomness doesn't really exist in coding. Like, you can have an element of randomness, but it's usually a pseudo randomness code, and it's not that flawed, but it's hard to execute. But this one has a VDF has a model that can specify the difficulty that will be taken based on the number of participants that have to be, like, attacking constantly, to almost like proof of work, but trying to guess some number or figure out some puzzle. It's just a bunch of numbers, really, but it perfectly timed it to maybe a deviation of 0.1 minutes, or like 0.1% or something. So we can, it's been looked at for Dow treasuries, right, to use a VDF to say, all right, if someone pulls out more than 5%, we'll hold it for 2 days or 3 days. So make the hacker keep trying to break through it to guess this game. They won't be able to for 3 days, because this is how the cryptography model functions. But that's just one consideration I'm just putting out for like for cybersecurity of how to actually mitigate that risk of time of like how can we slow things down, because slowing things down, you can't just say, all right, I'm going to add a 5-day waiting period based on an oracle. I mean, it just wouldn't really work like that. They'd find a way around it. So building that into yeah. Go ahead.
That's really, really interesting. I've seen a few models like that, but I come back to Johnny, what you were saying about maybe I misunderstood, but cybersecurity needing to be part of the conversation or even definition in terms of the framework that we're now defining within effectively what ownership is within this new paradigm, right? If that's the case, the way that I typically see this is, or that I'm currently thinking about, is that if we're making any changes to the way that we engage with let's say, with definitions of law and so forth, it's not creating a separate, it's not a side chain, and it's more like an L2, or it's a generalization of the concepts, right? It's a generalization of the math. You start off with, a one-dimensional thing, and then you make it two-dimensional, and then, more and more and more things, right? So if we are now then adding the concept of security into the definition of ownership, that concept needs to be applicable as well to, let's call it a bare minimum, where we're talking about me saying that, I'm in the jungle, and this is my stone, and we as a society agree that it's my stone, even if it's not sitting within a vault, even if it's there for anybody to take. But the ownership, the agreed upon ownership that the stone is mine, should not be really dependent on if the stone is secure or not for others to take, I think. And that's where I don't.
I'll give an example using functional equivalence. It's so I own my house and I put a big
talk about stones and you talk about function.
Yeah, no, but I own my house and I build a big gate around it to enhance the degree of control over physical possession of my property. Now, that's not something that's required by law, but I do it to enhance my degree of control. With tokens, there's not those same sort of things to enhance my degree of control over my property as building my gates. And so because we don't have the education tools, because it's new, there needs to be some lever or incentive to help people or token custodians build the people's gates or build the token custodians' gates to enhance the degree of control over the property is sort of the best example I can come up with.
But does that affect, I mean, is the consequence then potentially that if the asset is not secure enough, then you can question if the asset is owned or not by a specific individual?
And then also, sorry, on top of that, Johnny, in your example, with a house, if you have a house and you put a fence around it, you only own the house because of the fence?
Yeah.
No, but in the context of squatters and adverse possession, it changes. But basically, if somebody is in there, physical possession for 25 years or more, they have a claim to take the property from you. So if I take this into wallets, if there is a squatter in my wallet and they're looking at what I'm doing, we don't have the same sort of 25-year rule. We don't have even a 6-month rule or a 1-day rule, but it means that they could, at any time that they want, direct the tokens in a way that I don't control. And so the gate now becomes, Nathan, I think it was you telling me you could cleanse your wallet. You can run functions which basically denies all of the permissions that you've given. So there's those kind of activities that you could do to enhance your degree of control regularly. But again, nobody knows about them really, like apart from a very small section of our Web3 community, not everybody that is engaging with tokens.
Nathan, is that a Fireblocks feature that you were maybe referring to there?
Yeah, I think. When did I mention that, Joni? Because I
it was a few weeks ago. Yeah, a few weeks ago now. So I'm probably butchering. Forgive me.
You can on Fireblocks, you can definitely establish a number of different structures and features that allow the wallet to remain safe. But as I said this morning, Joni, you can still receive any airdrop. So unless you're again, I said it this morning already, but if you have a tight security protocol that balances chain analysis, Fireblocks, maybe Nansen, and breadcrumbs track where it's coming from as well, there's no way you can have just like a safe house, right? Because stuff will be coming in, stuff will be coming out. There'll be squatters in your wallet, there'll be squatters putting stuff in your wallet and pretty much shitting in your wallet, you know? So there are ways to try and mitigate it, but some stuff just has to happen.
I'm wondering also, Johnny, if the issue with the squatters, could we think of that as but it's a really interesting one, right? Because it touches, as you kind of take up that edge case in terms of, you know, the question mark around ownership. But could we say that it's an edge case where the law basically just slaps on a bit of a patch to address the humanity issue in you know, on a social level? So it's kind of not really part of the law. It's just this little patch that has been added there to fix one of these inconsistencies that we just don't know how to deal with as a society, rather than it actually being just that overall, that, you know, part of that general well-defined structure.
It's like the Open Source Wallet Foundation, where if all sort of self-hosted wallet software providers subscribe to whatever standards are put out, then the wallet will do that for you, and it will give you prompts to say, hey, self-hosted wallet Joni, or address, however many numbers, it's the end of the month, you've scheduled that you want to cleanse your wallet of all permissions, and, you know, this is MakerDAO, this is X, this is Y, this is Z. Do you agree that you want to cleanse? And it relies on you having the identifier of the protocol. And if you have these unknown airdropped agents or tokens, you can say, send to burn address, don't like. I think that's where it might go.
Yeah, you just reminded me of what it is. Yeah, so
oh, great.
It's also done in Fireblocks, but it's just a thing you can employ yourself. There are a couple, not protocols, but a couple like developers building these. I wouldn't say that they're safe just yet because they're done by like an independent person, but it's a bunch of smart contracts that you can execute yourself to your wallet periodically to do certain things on behalf of you.
It's basically not doing it to the wallet itself. It's more doing it to the protocols where that your wallet has engaged with. Because when you engage with a protocol from a given wallet, usually you kind of open up a permission that says this specific protocol is able to access X number of tokens. So it's what do you call it? It's like permissioning the wallet to transfer a certain amount of tokens to the protocol, and then you can just kill off that permission at the protocol level and not necessarily at the wallet level. It's kind of goes back to the idea that we were saying that the wallet itself doesn't really exist. It's just this concept to amalgamate your identity within the blockchain, but everything that happens at the blockchain level is not at the wallet level. It's actually at the protocol level, even the ledger that contains who owns what in terms of the token. But yeah, sorry, I'm digressing now. We're only at slide 2 of 20.
That's all right. Well, Iris, do you want to pick up where we left off?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, could it perhaps, you know, cybersecurity concerns, could it perhaps be included in a like an ISO requirement, like you're mentioning, Joni, but not necessarily be a requirement to have control, whether positive or negative? Or are you saying that it's inherently needs to be included in the definition?
Well, I think to the extent that a centralized token custodian or exchange is wanting to provide the service, then they can be ISO certified. But if I'm downloading a self-hosted wallet user, I've got no help other than sort of what prompts, and therefore that's where there may need to be a legislative basis for the self-hosted wallet providers, such as a MetaMask, even a Ledger, to come with like mandatory email notifications or something to keep you informed. I don't know.
I think that would be difficult and perhaps even counterproductive, because in TradFi, if I choose to withdraw $1 million in cash and I run around like an idiot on the street and they take it away from me, right? It's my problem.
It is, yeah.
Right. And if I have a wallet, right, if I buy a wallet and this wallet has shitty thread and it has a little hole in it after a while, and then, you know, coins start dropping off from it or something like that, it's you know, it's not the wallet provider's responsibility.
In terms of blame shifting, we're forced to use self-hosted wallets to engage in staking and DAO governance. So if there are regulatory frameworks that allow a token custodian to, you know, for me to do that through my custodian arrangement, then I don't have to self-host, but I do pay the custodian fees for the privilege of doing that, you know, for me and in a safer environment. But until that happens, if I want to be involved in that way, I'm sort of forced to take more cybersecurity risks than I may want to. But choice, you know, we still have choice, and that is ultimately at the end of the day what we want to uphold. So yeah, Iris, I think to a certain extent, yes.
So there does need to be a distinction made between direct custodian and third-party technology providers.
Yeah.
Okay, I will move on just in the interest of time. So this one goes through consultation question 30. There's 2 parts to this question. Talks about how crypto token custody arrangements could be characterized and structured as trusts, which Arturo, I think you mentioned as well. And so the paper also makes a distinction between equitable interests in trust-based crypto token custody facilities, which are represented by ledger entries in an intermediary's internal books and records, so account balances at a crypto token custody exchange, and also equitable interest in trust-based facilities that are represented by crypto tokens. So for example, where the tokens are minted in connection with the locking of other crypto tokens or in connection with the bridging or wrapping protocol. So distinction is made between those 2 things. And the question is whether they should be characterized and structured as trust, even where the underlying entitlements are held on a consolidated, unallocated basis for the benefit of multiple users, so not segregated, and potentially commingled with unallocated entitlements held for the benefit of the custodian itself.
Yeah, so this is sort of getting, Arturo, to what you were mentioning of the controllers of the protocol, the smart contract, and are they do they step into the shoes of what we would normally expect of a trustee with the fiduciary duties, like to take good care of the assets that they're looking after on behalf of others? And this is what we keep coming up against, like, is a smart contract protocol, even if somebody holds the keys to upgrade it, or if it's upgradable by vote of a governance body, governance token holders, who is the bare trustee? Because it is more like a bare trustee arrangement, and it's bare because the trustee doesn't have discretion. It literally has to hold the property and deal with it as directed by the person who is the owner. and we can't establish a bare trustee relationship because a bare trustee still relies on there being a legally recognized person. And is it?
Can we think of it this way?
Yeah.
Let's say that there is a law, which I'm sure there exists, that states some sort of minimum requirement for how good a road should be. And if there is an entity that takes responsibility for that road, then that individual or that entity becomes the custodian of the road. And if something goes wrong, then they are responsible for the quality and so, right? Now, let's say that 100 years pass and the road is forgotten and nobody's custodian of that road, right? Then who bears responsibility for what happens on the road, right? I think that the same thing could apply in smart contracts. If the smart contract has a set of private keys owned by an individual or controlled by an individual, then perhaps in that scenario, that individual is the person that bears the fiduciary responsibility of whatever happens with the smart contract. But if the private keys are burned, then it becomes irrelevant to even talk about it, right? Does that then mean that we should ban access to the smart contract in the same way that perhaps we should ban access to the road? I don't know. I think that that's kind of a separate question, right?
Well, it's coming up with the EU MiCA regime because they're in their commentary, they're saying that the developers should sort of set the safety procedures up and the compliance procedures up before the smart contract is launched, or deployed, if the intention is that there's no, the keys are burned. And then it says the users with that road or the protocol, they're the ones responsible for determining the safety of the road, or whether their use of the road inhibits the safety of others. I'm just paraphrasing.
Yeah.
So
I think that sounds reasonable.
But it disincentivizes use of the road because you don't have somebody there putting a stop sign or like traffic cones around the potholes. Like it's users will be disincentivized to engage with it because they just have no signals.
I think they should. I mean, that's my personal opinion entirely, right? But if I create if I were to go out to the public and have a fully self-custodied service, I think that, not from a legal standpoint, but personally, I would think it's extremely important to make sure that people understand that if they lose their keys, they lose their assets. Not your keys, not your crypto, right? Because that's kind of the principle, right? That is effectively a disincentivization to people that are scared of losing their crypto, or rather losing the keys for their wallet, right? So the part that I think could be dangerous if there is a regulatory requirement for the developers to have a process in place when they deploy the contracts so that it's well taken care of and so forth. And that's kind of the part that we're dealing with in terms of layer C, of having an entity that does take responsibility over that life cycle of the smart contracts, right? But I still think that actually putting that in play would be very difficult for innovation or innovators, right? Because automatically, as soon as you have specific requirements set up on you, it comes at a cost.
Agree. All right, shall we keep pushing along, Iris?
Yeah, I was also going to say, I think I visualize like I suppose custodian as like an institutional grade custodian that does this service, not just a digital currency exchange, for example, but thinking in the context of a direct institutional grade custodian. I think there is an argument to be made that there should be a trust relationship where, they have the direct control. We mentioned the 3 types of control. It's like positive and negative control. They don't give the instructions as to what happens, but the instructions are given to them and then they action those instructions, right?
The one last caveat is that you can never prove that you have actually burnt the keys. So that is a statement of trust.
Unless you do what Aztec did and have a burning ceremony, which they sent to like 100 people, and as long as one people burns it, and like you've got a video evidence of it, then you can't change anything.
Interesting. I'll move on to part 2 of the question. So
Please, yeah.
paper concludes that the best way of understanding the interest of beneficiaries under such trusts, presuming that they should be classified as trusts, are rights of co-ownership in an equitable tenancy in common. And so this is more of a legal definition. Maybe Joni, if you want to give a short definition of equitable tenancy in common. Or am I putting you on the spot? Sorry.
It's one thing that I've learned and I've gone back to over and over again, and it never sinks in, but the difference is between a tenancy in common and joint tenants, which, you know, sounds like the same thing, but if you're a joint tenant, then so Arturo and I, we might own a property, a house, and if we own it jointly, then the right of survivorship means if I die, the whole lot goes to you, and if you die, the whole lot goes to me. But in tenancy in common, it's more clearly divided. So I have a 50% right in the property and you have a 50% right in the property, or it's like 60-40, 30-70, whatever we say. And when you or I pass, it's in theory a taxable event where you acquire the other portion of the property, but the right of survivorship still assumes that the other tenant in common has the right to acquire it for no consideration. So it's, and I've probably butchered that as well, but it essentially, tenants in common gives you that segregated sense of ownership, whereas joint ownership, it's like blurry. I don't know if you want to provide a better explanation of this.
And
provide a better explanation.
in the common scenario, if taking our, let's call it ownership as tenancy in common, if I die and you don't purchase it, do you have to purchase it? And if you don't, who owns the other half?
Well, if you've left a will, you might specify who your segment goes to.
Okay.
But if you haven't specified, I think that the assumption is that it goes back to the other joint tenant, sorry, the other tenant in common.
Okay.
Yeah, so what does the consultation question ask? Sorry, Iris, I missed that part.
So these, if it's considered as a trust, is the best way of classifying the relationship one of
tenancy in common? Yeah, and I think so, because you know, if there's 100 of us that have put collateral in the Maker protocol, and I know that I put 1 ETH, you know, based on my wallet transactions, Nathan's put 2 ETH in as collateral, like that's the segmentation, that's the tenancy in common, and I want my 1 ETH back, and Nathan wants his 2 ETH back. Whereas if you presume joint tenancy, then you've all got to establish what your rights to claim are, and it's an unnecessary legal process when we've already got the ledger record of mapping. Yeah. So I think I agree. Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. And then furthermore, should there be statutory intervention clarifying the subject matter certainty requirements for creating a valid trust in the circumstances of commingled, unallocated holdings of crypto tokens? Well,
this is the thing, like, I don't think that they're commingled necessarily, nor are they unallocated. The mapping, so in the gem join contract of Maker protocol, and I think a number of them follow that sort of method, it always clearly delineates which amount of tokens has come from which public address. So yeah, but factually, it is very hard for regulators to understand that and to read the mapping and to understand, okay, but the mapping isn't a ledger record. So I think perhaps maybe statutory intervention is required, but if they just went through education, then perhaps it wouldn't be.
But if statutory intervention is required, then it sets technological constraints that
On how
go
they
against
choose to
the
do it.
permissionless. You will no, not only it also goes against, let's call it the permissionless principle. Right, so basically they're saying that protocols may not be permissionless because there must be an ability for the statutory expectation to be executed.
Yeah, and I agree, like a protocol, in order for it to be autonomous and trusted, like it's got to be a standardized thing, and the more variables you start putting in it, the less autonomous and reliable it is. Like the more threat vectors are opened up because of those variables. So this actually is, I think, a tough one to answer. I mean, the market could come in to solve this and just have clearer terms and conditions, and protocols, you know, the front end terms and conditions. So you access Maker through Oasis front end, because Oasis is not they don't treat themselves as the provider of the protocol, just the provider of the interface. The terms and conditions are warped, so they don't actually give you an understanding of the product, the lending product. And the white paper doesn't necessarily give you the terms and conditions type summary of what are the rights and obligations of a person engaging with the protocol product. So if we just bridge that gap and have clearer disclosure, that could be the statutory intervention, where the developer just has to write a white paper with more prescriptive format to say exactly what are the rights, intended rights and obligations, and that maybe could help. Yeah.
Look, I think that the conversation is actually quite binary. Either there is an expectation of fiduciary rights and, you know, statutory intervention, and I'm actually just guessing what that means. I don't have a proper definition in my head. But as soon as I say intervention and statutory, I'm thinking that the law has the right to do things. So just roll with it. 1 sec. I know you, Joni, you're going to correct me. So let me live my life. I think that either you do start setting those expectations, and therefore you're automatically saying that smart contracts are regulated, because a developer cannot automatically deploy something that is purely permissionless. Or you do allow people to kind of do what they want. And if what they want is not in line with expectation of the law in terms of actually being permissioned and censored and all of those things, then those permissionless, let's call it pure Web3 protocols, need to be highly disclaimed. And you know, they need to have that little cancer warning saying that if you lose your crypto, you're screwed. And we don't know what happens with this, right? But it's your right to assign value to this little position on the array in the computer, right? Because if they don't do that, then basically what they're saying from a legal standpoint is that you legally do not have the right to assign monetary value to this token, because that token is not compliant. And if you start off by explicitly saying that at the token level, then, you know, that effectively, I don't know, I'm rambling, but I would guess that it sets a precedent for you to be able, or rather for the government to say, we decide what you may or may not assign. monetary value too, right? And like, I'm going a little bit extreme here, but I think that there's no way in which you don't start here and you end up at that point, because it's kind of like a straight line.
Well, that is exactly the frontier that we're on.
Yeah.
You know,
So all these questions,
mm,
all these questions are the same thing.
mm. Yeah, but they all tiptoe around the edges. Like, none of us are saying, what is a protocol? What is a DAO? Can we treat protocols as if the standards that we had for email and for file transfers? Like, a lot of organizations use them, but it's not the standard that's regulated. So a lot of us are trying to make that argument that protocols are not the thing that should be regulated. It should be the services around them. But alas, we have many more weeks still ahead of us if we can be more articulate in the way that we advocate that. So I know we're at time. Iris, I'll hand over to you for any closing comments.
Yeah, sure. So I think we have a few more questions on chapter 16, which we can cover next week. And then we have chapters 17 to 19 as well.
Great. Okay, well, thank you for all your efforts on the slides, Iris.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Can you share those slides?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Happy to.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Good one.